very, very good morning, good evening to all of you. And I'm sorry again for my technical problems, but my name is Namita Datta, and I'm Program Manager of Solutions for Youth Employment. It's a global program based here in the World Bank. I just need to say that because a lot of our participants today are not from the World Bank. So the topic today is a really exciting one. It's a really important one. And it's about the gender gap that we see in women's access to jobs. Not just access to jobs, but equal access to good quality, well-paid, formal, productive jobs. And there's enough analytical work on this. There's enough data, there's enough analysis. It's not news to anybody on this call today that we do see that gap. But what is even more disturbing is that gap hasn't narrowed over the decades. It's a stubborn gap. And in a lot of the analysis that we see about reasons for this gap, one of the big ones is the burden that women bear to look after children and elders in the family. And that hasn't changed over time. And it is one of the most important factors. It isn't the only one, but it is one of the most important ones. So the question that we want to discuss today is, if the world had enough adequate and affordable care options, would we then see a really good and an important increase in women's ability to participate in the labor? But more importantly also, can these care jobs themselves be well-paid, productive, good quality jobs? So it sort of can enable women's access to good quality jobs on both sides. Firstly, it frees up their time, but they're good jobs in themselves. And I'm so delighted that we have 4 really good speakers who come from very different perspectives. So I'm really happy that Karen is here with us, Karen Moore. Karen works on policy issues in the Economic Growth Division of Global Affairs Canada. And we all know Canada has been very, very proactive about its feminist agenda. So I'm really happy, Karen, that you're with us today. I'm also happy that Lauren Gula is also joined. Lauren works with the Gender and Economic Inclusion part of the IFC. And then we have Victoria Duncan. So welcome, Lauren, and welcome, Victoria. Victoria heads the research for Harambee. Harambee, you know, is a really high-performing youth employment accelerator based in South Africa. And then Amanda Devarcelli, who works as the global lead for early childhood development in education global practice of the World Bank. So you see, it's a really interesting mix of public, private, and practitioner. So Victoria brings a real practitioner perspective. But we also have the public side, the private sector. How does the private sector think? How do employers think about this issue of care? So enough from me. I'm going to hand it over to Karen to kick us off. And I also want to say that please feel free to put questions in the chat. And if I don't have any more tech issues, I'm going to look at your comments in chat. And then in the end, I hope we'll have some time for discussion. So Karen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Namita. Are you able to see my slides? Yes, wonderful. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for inviting me to participate in this important conversation. Today, I'll be reflecting on how both unpaid and paid care work issues impact access to decent work, particularly for women, and ways of addressing these issues. And I'll be doing that by first introducing you to some of Canada's work in this space and how we at Global Affairs Canada understand the challenges. And then I'll share some highlights from a recent paper commissioned by the Donor Committee for Enterprise Development on childcare solutions for women in micro and small enterprises. So Canada identified unpaid care work issues as a key barrier to women's economic empowerment in the Feminist International Assistance Policy, launched in 2017. And it explicitly committed us to taking a feminist approach to helping address the disproportionate amount of care shouldered by women and girls in all their diversity around the world. But it's really been the pandemic that's led folks to take note of what feminist scholars and really women in general have been saying for decades. First, that care work is essential. It's needed for both human well-being and sustainable economic growth, but it remains undervalued and insufficiently recognized. Second, that the unequal gendered distribution of unpaid care work and the low quality of many paid care work opportunities infringe on the rights of women and girls. And the pandemic highlighted the critical nature of care work to societies and economies and how they function, but at the same time, it exacerbated the gender disparities in its provision. So I want to zoom in a bit on the links between unpaid and paid care work and access to decent work. Well, according to ILO data, globally, women over 15 years old perform on average 3.2 times more unpaid care work than men. This imbalance exists in every region, and it ranges from 1.7 in the Americas to 4.7 in the Arab states. But it does also vary a lot by household and by community, and it's often many times higher. This inequity contributes to time poverty among women and girls, and this affects our capacity to participate equitably in activities of our own choosing, including employment and entrepreneurship, but also in education and training, political and civic activities, leisure, rest, and taking care of our own health. And combined with time poverty, the drudgery that characterizes much in unpaid care work, and the long days from combining unpaid care work and paid work can result in physical and emotional depletion. Paid care work is also disproportionately undertaken by women and girls, and these jobs are often in the informal sector. Low quality, low status, a lack of social recognition, low pay, poor working conditions, and limited social protections. Many of these jobs are taken up by women who are further marginalized by status as migrants or ethnic minorities. And within the care workforce, domestic workers experience some of the worst working conditions and are particularly vulnerable to exploitation. Because around 2/3 of the broader health and care workforce is made up by women, and almost 20% of the global female employment is in this sector, efforts to support decent work for paid care workers can have significant impacts for women in the labor market. I just want to reflect a little bit, because this is Solutions for Youth Employment, what are the specific implications for youth here? So young women are most likely to have preschool-age children at the same time that they're trying to establish themselves in the labor market. And we know that the amount of time women spend on unpaid care work markedly increases with the presence of young children. And girls are also more likely to have their education or training disrupted by care responsibilities, and young women are often in entry-level paid care work in the informal sector. But it isn't only young women. Women of all ages are affected. We've got grandmothers caring for grandchildren, middle-aged women taking care of both children and aging parents, older women working as domestic workers, and older women without access to pensions because they spent their lives in unpaid or informal paid care work. Because the negative effects of the pandemic for women are anticipated to be long-lasting without proactive interventions addressing the care economy, Canada's taken the opportunity to double down on this issue. At the Generation Equality Forum in 2021, Canada announced a commitment of 100 million Canadian dollars for standalone programming to address issues in both unpaid and paid care work in the low and middle income countries in which Canada works. To date, under this commitment, we've announced 3 projects. A $10 million contribution to the World Bank Group's Invest in Childcare initiative, and Amanda is going to hopefully be telling you more about this exciting program of work. A $3 million project with the ILO on supporting decent work opportunities for domestic workers in Peru, and a $10 million project in 4 Eastern Caribbean countries with UN Women, ensuring care services are included in gender-responsive social protection systems. And late last year, we launched a $36 million Action for Paid Care Workers initiative. This is very much a work in progress, and we're going to be selecting several gender transformative projects that will address paid care work issues. We're going to do this through partnering with and supporting local women's rights, feminist, and Indigenous organizations in the important work that they do in the care economy space. And additional projects are still under development and are going to be announced over the next weeks and months. So drawing heavily on the work of ILO and many others, we've identified 5 entry points on integrating care work into our programming in order to foster gender equality, women's economic empowerment, and women's ability to participate in the economy, in education, and in public life. Recognizing the value of unpaid and poorly paid care work to households, economies, and societies. Reducing the drudgery and hours spent on unpaid care work through time and labor-saving technology and infrastructure. Redistributing the responsibility for care work more equitably, both within the household, between women and girls and men and boys, and outside it, to the state, the market, communities, and civil society. Ensuring unpaid and paid care workers are represented and have a voice in decision-making and design of policies and programs that affect their lives. And responding to the rights and needs of all unpaid and paid care workers, including through social protection and labor rights. So turning now to a research brief produced by Kate Grantham and Atif Somji. This paper was commissioned last year by us in the Donor Committee for Enterprise Development's Women's Economic Empowerment Working Group. And Atif and Kate, if you are online today, please do say hello in the chat, and I will be pasting a link to the paper there as well. So the paper explores a range of childcare solutions available specifically to meet the needs of women who are micro and small enterprise owners and workers in low and middle income countries. And it focuses on the informal sector, given its importance and the lack of employer-supported childcare options within it. Some solutions that they identify also do offer business and job opportunities for women MSEs. The paper first identifies the ways childcare responsibilities can act as a constraint on women who run or work in MSEs. As mentioned, time spent fully dedicated to childcare is time that can't be spent on paid work. And timing is often an issue as well. So for example, in Ghana and South Africa, women street traders noted being unable to take advantage of the best times of day for business because early morning and evening is also when their children need them most. Many women need to multitask to care for children and earn an income, and often have no safe alternative to bring young children to work. This can reduce productivity and income, and also creates risks for children. Women entrepreneurs often choose to work at home or close to home, or to take informal work, specifically to be able to manage their care responsibilities alongside paid work. While this provides greater flexibility, it often also means accepting work that's less regular and less well paid. A heavy care workload can also limit women's participation in skills training, mentoring, and other enterprise development services, and combining paid and unpaid work can lead to significant stress and physical, mental, and emotional depletion. So the paper also looks at barriers faced when trying to access childcare services, and I think this list is going to be familiar to many parents tuning in today from around the world. These barriers include high costs, the distance from a worker's home or workplace, limited operating hours that don't accommodate long and irregular work days, concerns over safety and the quality of care that children receive, and social norms that limit how acceptable it is for women to work and to leave their children in the care of others. And just to note that while this paper focuses on childcare, all of these constraints and barriers also pertain to care for older people and people with disabilities in different ways. And often there is even fewer service options available in low and middle income countries for these groups. So quality, affordable childcare solutions can help alleviate these barriers and contribute to multiple wins. There is emerging evidence that they can facilitate women's labor force participation and productivity in terms of employment rates, time spent working, earnings, and formality. There's well-documented evidence of positive and long-lasting effects on child development and well-being, and it can create decent job and business opportunities. Estimates from the World Bank suggest that meeting the unmet need for childcare alone could generate 43 million jobs globally, while the ILO estimates that filling gaps in care services more generally could generate almost 300 million jobs by 2035. So through a review of existing approaches to delivering childcare services to women MSEs, two of which have actually been operational for decades, Kate and Atif identified 4 interconnected models that fill childcare service gaps and improve on the informal, low-quality childcare that's sometimes available to low-income women entrepreneurs. Social franchising, cooperatives, market-based solutions, and partnerships, multi-stakeholder partnerships. Each approach brings its own strengths and challenges. and none of it replaces the need for deepening public investment in childcare. And I really encourage you to look at the paper. It provides detailed examples of how each model can work and rich case studies. But in the interest of time, I just want to highlight 4 points made in the paper. First, context matters. If there are lots of informal providers already existing in the market, improving quality through a social franchise model may be an option. If women entrepreneurs are already organized, then cooperative models can be a possible route. If there's a dynamic women's MSE sector, programs that support market-based solutions through skills training on quality caregiving and business management, financial services, and business incubators or accelerators can help stimulate the creation and growth of quality childcare businesses. We also need to focus more on determining solutions for rural and semi-urban areas, which tend to be particularly underserved. Second, quality matters, and not only in terms of protecting and benefiting children, which is the bare minimum, but also in terms of convincing families to use these external childcare services and in terms of the working conditions of the childcare workers themselves. But it can be hard to balance quality with scale, profitability, and sustainability goals. Third, complementary demand-side interventions may be needed to ensure uptake, particularly addressing the pervasive social norms and expectations relating to women's work and childcare responsibilities. And finally, when it comes to providing decent employment for childcare workers, the existing solutions do vary in terms of wages, working conditions, training, professionalization, and access to social and labor protections. Some social franchises may do well in some aspects of training and professionalization, while some cooperatives can be stronger on ensuring childcare worker voice and representation. But it's important to note that overall, options that meet the needs of women MSEs and do create quality jobs are emerging. So thanks so much, and happy to answer any questions you have, and I'll paste some links to some resources in the chat.
Thanks a lot, Karen. That I think really set the stage well. It's really interesting to hear the specific constraints and also the solutions that you proposed. And Kate and Atif, if you wanted to jump in during the discussion, please absolutely feel. Let's go to Lauren. Lauren from IFC can sort of maybe especially throw some light on how does one work with the private sector? Because one of the solutions that Karen mentioned was a market-based one, and maybe Lauren, you might cover that in your comments. Over to you.
Great, thanks so much, and hopefully you can hear me now. Great, so thank you for inviting me and IFC to be part of today's webinar. We're really excited to be here. And congratulations to the organizers for bringing these themes and topics together. It's definitely provided some food for thought for us as well. But let me begin with a little bit of background on IFC's care work. IFC first started to look at care in 2015 as a way to lower barriers to women's employment and economic participation. And since then, IFC has released a number of reports and publications on employer-supported childcare and family-friendly workplace policies. And it's engaged more than 1,000 companies across more than 20 countries in its Tackling Childcare program. And building on this momentum, last year IFC launched a new program called Care to Equal, which is supported by USAID and part of the World Bank Group's Invest in Childcare initiative, which Amanda will be speaking to in just a bit. Care to Equal continues to build the business case and knowledge on family-friendly workplaces, as well as employer-supported childcare, but it also expands the scope to look at elderly care and mental health, recognizing that, as the pandemic clearly showed us, these intersecting dimensions of care create compounding barriers for families. For example, you may have heard the term sandwich care or sandwich generation to describe those that are juggling both childcare and elderly care. Through Care to Equal, we're also looking more closely at the care economy and exploring pathways to support the growth of care businesses in emerging markets. So we continue to expand our work on care because it's a development imperative. Progress on care can improve outcomes for children, increase women's economic participation, enhance economic growth and decent work opportunities, which in turn can support climate action and a range of other sustainable development goals. And to effectively address the global care crisis, we need all hands on deck. So as Karen mentioned, governments have a primary and irreplaceable responsibility to enable access to quality, affordable, and accessible childcare. But the private sector as employers, as innovators, and as investors is an important partner. And I'll note here that according to ILO, the care sector has the potential to generate nearly 300 million jobs by 2035. This is a huge opportunity for youth employment and entrepreneurship. In fact, ILO estimates that investments in care sectors would create nearly 18 million more jobs for young people by 2030. The demand for care professionals is growing, from professional caregivers and educators to administrators and policy professionals, spanning childcare, elderly care, disability care, and many other dimensions. There's also a huge demand for products and services and new business models that address the needs of the 350 million children that lack access to childcare and their families, as well as the rapidly growing aging population that is projected to account for 60% of global consumer spending by 2050. The care economy is ripe for disruption, and those that are closest to the challenges, including the many young people and especially young women who shoulder the bulk of care responsibilities, are uniquely positioned to identify solutions. A notable source of inspiration for us has been the Care Economy Knowledge Hub, which is led by a group called Core Global and with support from IDRC and others. It includes a mapping of over 165 businesses operating in the care economy across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And so one example is Ayat Care, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, in Bangladesh, which focuses on childcare and elderly care, as well as health monitoring, mental health support, and medical advice. Notably, it provides training and employment opportunities to mostly female youth who have dropped out of school. Another great example is Hippocampus, a social enterprise in Mexico that partners with employers to provide high quality, affordable on-site childcare, fully aligned with parents' needs, including their working hours. It also provides opportunities to local educators, most of whom are women. And the partnership between Hippocampus and Grupo Altex was the focus of an IFC case study that was released earlier this year, and it provides some interesting insights on the benefits of employer-supported childcare. On this slide, you'll see a little bit about Grupo Altex and its operating context. It's a Mexican agro-industrial business with more than 7,000 employees and 10 plants, serving large local and international clients such as Danone. And while women's labor force participation in Mexico has definitely improved in recent years, it is still third lowest of the OECD at 42%. And a key reason for this is the fact that women are responsible for the bulk of unpaid care work, an estimated 77% of unpaid care work. Altex became interested in offering childcare support to its employees because it knew it could lead to a healthier and stronger workforce, and because it wanted to help improve the lives of people in the communities and where it operated. So a key finding from IFC's research on employer-supported childcare is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Employers can support access to quality, affordable childcare through on-site facilities, through partnerships with local community-based childcare centers or the government or other employers, or through childcare subsidies and allowances. Employers can also create family-friendly workplaces by offering paid leave, flexible work options, and lactation rooms as an example. In the case of Altex, the company already offered maternity and paternity leave for all employees, regardless of contract type, and other types of support, such as lactation breaks and flexible work arrangements. However, after an initial meeting with Hippocampus, Altex was interested to better understand the availability of care facilities in the communities where it operates. So Hippocampus and Altex teamed up to conduct some research and discovered that childcare options available to Altex employees and others were scarce and or low quality. They were also relatively expensive given income levels. The findings from the research set the path for the company's decision to partner with Hippocampus to offer childcare within the communities where it operates. So what does the partnership entail? Thus far, Altex has partnered with Hippocampus to run 5 centers for its employees, both men and women, as well as community members and suppliers. Altex made a capital investment of approximately $150,000 US, and it covers most of the operational expenses. The families contribute a small fee, with community members paying a slightly higher amount. And true to the Hippocampus model, the child care centers are well integrated into the communities, employing local women, using local materials, and establishing strong relationships with the families. We started offering childcare services in 2016. 721 children have benefited from the services. The benefits Altex has seen associated with its investment align very much with IFC's broader research on the business case for employer-supported childcare. In particular, the company noted that rotation rates and absenteeism rates have declined since introducing childcare. The results of company employee surveys are also telling. For example, of those that were surveyed, 100% of employees who benefited from the company's investment said that their productivity increased. 60% of parents said that childcare centers was a factor in their decision to join the company, and 97% mentioned that the service increases the probability of continuing to work at the company. Altex also associates their investment in childcare with helping to strengthen community relations. Not only is the company bringing needed jobs to communities through its core business, but it's also investing in the future of the communities. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you for your time, and really looking forward to joining the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lauren, and thanks also especially for calling out the link with mental health. So the link education and female dropout rates from schools. I was curious, and maybe we'll follow it up during Q&A. At one point, some years ago, IFC did a really interesting report called WinWest, where you actually quantified what it is for the employer, like sort of make the business case for employers. I like that graph that you had with the arrow show going up, the better quality childcare, which is provided by the employer, gets more and more expensive as you get better and better at it. And you had some stats there on perceptions of parents and employees, but I wonder if there's more work on really quantifying what it is for the company to really make the business case, because at the end of the day, the language most effective to talk to the private sector is. So I wonder if there are more insights there, if there's more follow-up work. But we'll come during the Q&A to some of that. I want to hand it over now to Victoria. Victoria, you're connected, right? Yeah. Okay. Over to you. And Victoria heads research, as I mentioned during the introduction, at Harambee, which is based in South Africa. And Harambee's particular focus is youth employment, and they do quite a lot of innovative things. So over to you, Victoria.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So just as a way of introduction about Harambee, for those who aren't familiar, we're a not-for-profit social enterprise. We're primarily based in South Africa, but we also have an operation in Rwanda. And we partner with government, private sector, and social entities to develop solutions to accelerate youth employment. So last year, we began our journey in the social and care economy space. We worked closely with the IC to develop 2 research reports, which I've no doubt will be shared with you later, to really understand what the landscape looked like in South Africa, and also to understand what the potential for job opportunities are. I think the main reason why this was such a compelling sector for us is the triple impact that it kind of offers. So not only is it offering benefits and social long-term benefits to the end user, being either the child or the patient, whether you kind of on the healthcare space or the childcare, early childhood development space. There's also the aspect of it creating a job creation potential, as well as providing access to the labor market for the primary caregiver. And I think when we look at this, the fact that most primary caregivers are women, this is kind of a compelling business case in terms of enabling access of young women in particular to enter into the labor market. Our research actually found that affordable childcare would lead to an 8 percentage point increase in labor force participation. So what does the care economy look like in South Africa in particular? I think, you know, just as a broad overview, it takes up approximately 13% of the total economy. It contributes 2 million jobs, of which 84% are filled by women and about a third are filled by young people. What I've done is I've kind of put a graph there from our report, which is taken from the quarterly labor force survey. And I think there are two kind of key outcomes that are reflected in this. The first is that domestic work contributes quite significantly towards South Africa's care economy. I know up there it just reflects those in domestic work between the ages of 18 to 34. In total, the number's closer to 1 million. So 1 million jobs in South Africa are kind of allocated to domestic work. I think the other aspect that this graph shows is just the sheer nature and contribution that women play within the care economy in South Africa. And this, to differentiate, that this is the paid care economy. So these are individuals who are actually receiving income for their work. And when we speak about the care economy, it is a bit tricky because I feel like it's made up of a bunch of different sectors. You've got your healthcare, you've got your childcare, you've got social workers, you've also got domestic work, so household care. And I think just for ease through this presentation, I will kind of primarily focus on early childhood development. I'll also touch a bit on healthcare, and also potentially actually education, which is education, although it's not technically within the care economy, from a job creation perspective, a lot of the skills in early childhood development and education are overlapping. And so we can kind of look at the opportunities together. So what is the actual opportunity that we came across in our research? Within the early childhood development space, currently only 36% of children aged between 4 and 6 are accessing early learning programs. So that translates into about 194,000, let's say, staff base within the sector. The government of South Africa has quite an audacious goal to achieve universal early childhood access by 2030. And to deliver on this, it's been estimated that it could create 450,000 new jobs. These jobs, about half of them, 250,000, are in classroom positions. So that would be ECD practitioners, classroom assistants, playgroup facilitators. And then the other 200,000 would be supportive roles, whether it's a nutrition program, a literacy program, a vegetable garden, things like that. In the healthcare space, our current nurse base is about 409,000. We estimated that given the current pipeline of training as well as retirements happening within the sector, the opportunity is there's a shortage of about 166,000. And in entry-level healthcare, there's also a shortage of 23,000. So entry-level healthcare would be community health care workers within communities and townships. And then in the education space, just because I said the skills kind of overlap, the current base is about 497,000. And given the current skilling pipeline, there's going to be a shortage of 176,000 by 2030. So overall, in South Africa alone, there is the potential for over 800,000 jobs to be created within the care economy. And this is not even looking at, I want to say, the other kind of overlapping jobs or roles that might kind of fall within the space. So who could potentially deliver on these 800,000? What is the profile of your average care economy worker in South Africa? It's not anything too surprising. So I think your average caregiver, paid caregiver in South Africa is she's Black, she's female, she has minimal levels of accredited skill. And this one is a little bit tricky because nurses do have a higher skills base. But in the areas of early childhood development and community health workers, chances are they don't have any form of tertiary education. And in fact, in South Africa, I think the early childhood development programs, only 42% of early childhood development practitioners actually have the necessary qualifications required by South African law. Third aspect of the profile is that they tend to be poorly remunerated. So down specifically in early childhood development, there's a little snapshot of the current earnings across the different quintiles. I did a very rough translation into US dollars just to make it a little bit easier to understand. But in the lower quintiles of quintiles 1 and 2 per month, an early childhood development practitioner is earning between 500 and 1,000 Rand. In quintiles 3, this raises slightly, where they might be earning, a teacher might be, or a classroom staff might be earning closer to 2,800, while with a principal earning around 5,000. And then in the quintiles 4 and 5, you start earning around that 20,000 mark. But even then, ECD practitioners do earn a lot less than teachers because teachers do have access to the public wage bill, and they are better funded in that sense. With the wages in South Africa, even within the caregiver profile, and given that there is such a dominance of women in the sector, there still exists a gender wage gap. So our own internal findings have found that male caregivers earn up to 50% in female caregivers. And there are a number of aspects related to this. I think it also speaks to the sector as itself, where for certain sectors like early childhood development, it is slightly more informal. And so it's not as easy to maybe attract demand with kind of your own businesses that are. So given that there is such an opportunity for the care economy in South Africa, and given that the profile kind of fits where there is a high levels of youth unemployment, they does beg the question of why this hasn't been done before. And I think both Lauren and Karen have kind of touched on it previously, that it's quite difficult to deliver on these job opportunities. Some of the challenges that we have faced particularly, and for this I'm going to focus a little bit more on early childhood development, is that there's huge issues around access to funding. So the ECD sector in South Africa is very informal, it's very vulnerable. So for a lot of ECD practitioners, they're having to start their own businesses, and it's quite difficult to access first funding to start up the business, then funding at an operational basis, so on an ongoing basis, and then also to find additional funding to potentially grow the business. It's also quite difficult because certain services such as ECD and to a degree healthcare are viewed as public goods. And so if they are not able to access public funding, there's a reliance on the beneficiaries to fund it. And if you're against a context of very high unemployment, which South Africa is, you're not always guaranteed that you're going to be paid for the services that are being offered. The second big challenge is around skilling. So I mentioned that there are skilling requirements required by law for certain roles. However, they're not necessarily being delivered on in practice. And also to even gain access to those skills, there's high barriers to entry, there's high turnover in these courses, and then there's just not enough training institutions that actually deliver the programs that offer the qualifications required. Within ECD in particular, there's issues around registration. So the registration process is very onerous. So only about 40% of ECD centres in South Africa are registered. And this actually speaks to the laws and the systems and the policies that govern the registration process. So they're fantastic for a formal sector, but given the informality of the sector, they don't work in practice. And so having high requirements for occupational health and safety and for zoning, it doesn't necessarily suit the context.
Victoria,
and then the final, yes?
Victoria, can I just request you if you can wrap up in the next few seconds? I just want to make sure Amanda has enough time to
share. Sure. Then I'm going to jump ahead because I think the last aspect. So what are we learning about this? I think for us at Harambee, another reason why this is so important to us is that we have been working very closely with the South African program called the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention. And this has meant that we've been able to look at the ECD sector in particular from various angles. And what we have learned is that firstly, sector stabilization is incredibly important. It's all great creating new jobs, but you need to support existing jobs and increase earnings. The second is that systemic reform needs to happen. So at a policy level, and this is something we're working quite closely with government is you need to review some of the policies around registration, policies around bylaws, and make them more accessible so that ECD centers can be registered. The third is the importance of micro-enterprise for growth, which I feel like Lauren has touched on. And then finally, it's just we're seeing huge benefits with short-term opportunities and public employment programs to attract young people into the sector, to provide them with income, experience, and also just exposure to kind of what it means to work within the ECD sector. So I'm going to close off the excited so that Amanda does have some time to speak.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Victoria. That was actually very interesting. I hand it over to you, Amanda. I know that we're running out of time, but over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pull up my slides, but start talking while I do so. First of all, congratulations to the organizer. This has been a really, really fabulous session. And I think, taking a global perspective as someone who's working on the childcare agenda across sectors and across the bank and with a range of countries, everything we've heard today is really being echoed in countries around the world. The particulars that Victoria spoke about South Africa, the example that Lauren gave from Mexico, and the findings that Karen shared are really things we're seeing over and over again in the research and in country level situations. So I want to just start with a couple of numbers to throw at you. The first number is 350 million. This is the number of children in the world today who need childcare but do not have access before they enter primary school. That's more than 40% of all the world's children who are below primary school entry age. And you won't be surprised to know that 8 out of 10 of these children in need live in low and middle income countries. So this is a problem that is disproportionately distributed. We've already heard this figure today. It's 43 million. This is a very conservative estimate of the number of jobs that could be created globally in the childcare sector, specifically if we scaled up access to cover all of those children who are in need right now but do not have access. And then my last number is 6 to 10%. Well, I guess it's two numbers, 6 to 10% increase. This is, in general, if you look across countries, the bump we would expect to see in female labor force participation if access to childcare was scaled up to meet current needs. So I want to talk a bit about what we're doing at the World Bank. What we've done over the last few years, a group of staff working together from across sectors and across regions has really worked together to put together an argument on why investing in childcare is central to building human capital. It's not just a nice investment for children. It's not just a nice investment for women. It is an essential investment to help countries' economies grow and for social growth as well. It's really a win-win-win-win-win. So what are those 4 wins? First, we have better women's employment. Second, we have increased family welfare. Third, we have improved child development outcomes. And fourth, we have increased economic and social growth with benefits for businesses and economies. You'll see on the screen here a paper, Better Jobs and Brighter Futures, Investing in Childcare to Build Human Capital. I think one of my colleagues will post it in the chat, but it's a large evidence review we completed about 2 years ago, looking at these 4 buckets of benefits that we could expect, both in the short and long term, if countries invested more in childcare. We also looked at what countries need to be doing. How do they make these investments? What should we do on the childcare agenda? And we identified 5 policy goals. So the first is to expand access to childcare by promoting diverse types of provision. And we've heard a lot about that today already. There's no one-size-fits-all model. Some of it will be home-based. Some of it will be through public-private partnerships. Some of it will be through public sector provision. Second is to prioritize childcare coverage for the most vulnerable families and ensure low-cost and free options are available. And I think that also leads into our third policy goal, which is allocate sufficient financing to make quality childcare affordable for families. It's critical to acknowledge that there's no country in the world where childcare is going to be affordable for all families that need it unless it is publicly subsidized. We need public finance for childcare, and we need much more of it. We also need to find ways to crowd in private sector investment, and it was great to hear from Lauren some examples. The fourth goal is around defining clear, workable institutional arrangements and building system coherence. When we look across countries, childcare is often an orphan. There is not any one government agency responsible for delivering it or ensuring the quality of it. There are often conflicting policies. Victoria also talked about in the South Africa context, which is very consistent across countries, that the regulatory environment for access to childcare is something that actually prevents providers from entering into the market, and doesn't actually support the delivery of quality childcare. Which brings me to the fifth goal, which is ensuring that children are in safe and stimulating environments through a robust quality assurance system and a supported and capable workforce. And there's really 2 key issues there. One is we need to make sure that childcare is high quality. One, because no parent wants to put their children in a setting that looks unsafe or unsupportive to their child's development. And 2, because we want to make sure that children are actually getting the developmental benefits out of quality childcare that we're seeking. And then this issue of the workforce is really critical. We know that there are jobs in the childcare sector, but we also know that they tend to be poorly paid, poor working conditions, perhaps not well respected. And we need to shift this narrative and make sure these are decent jobs with good pay, with reasonable working conditions, and to give this workforce the respect that it's due, given the important job it's playing for our children. So what we've done at the bank is to launch the Invest in Childcare initiative. It's an initiative with more than $100 million in funding. I know Karen mentioned the contribution from Global Affairs Canada that we're very grateful for. We have other funding from other bilateral as well as philanthropic sources as well. And I want to tell you quickly what we're doing, because I think it's really, we're trying to address many of the issues you've heard today from other speakers. We are providing bank executed funding first, about $25 million. And this means money that World Bank staff manage working with governments and partners. There are 3 things we're funding with that money. The first is catalytic grants to countries. So this is demand-driven, competitive funding that we award to countries to generate more and better quality investments in childcare. We've already awarded the first 25 grants, and we expect to award at least 50. Many of these are exploring innovative approaches or making the case for investments in childcare or evaluating different approaches. There's a really diverse stream of work being done, but a lot of it is focused on how we integrate childcare into youth employment and skills training programs, or how we provide childcare so that youth can participate in skills and jobs training programs, or in how to support entrepreneurs to open childcare centers. The second area is on global analytical work. Here we're really building the evidence base through evaluations, return on investment analysis, diagnostics, increasing the availability of data at the country and global level, and then producing a number of global public goods and tools that will be publicly available. And then we do a lot of capacity building. We have different programs here, an early years fellowship, programs engaging with policymakers, and programs engaging with World Bank staff to really build capacity and understanding of how to work on expanding access to quality childcare across sectors and through different vehicles. And then we have about $80 million in recipient executed funding available. Recipient executed funding is funding that goes from the World Bank to governments. And this is done on an incentive basis. So if governments choose to invest some of their World Bank finance in childcare, we will match it on a dollar for dollar basis in low income countries and a dollar for $2 basis for middle income countries. And that's up to $10 million per country. This map just gives you a sense of where those first 25 grants that I mentioned are. I should say that we had huge demand for these grants. You can see that the Africa region has the biggest chunk of them, followed by Latin America, and then spread out between East and Central Europe, the Middle East and North Africa, and South Asia. Slightly skewed towards low-income countries, but we had huge demand from middle-income countries as well. You know, I think that one of the reasons I'm really optimistic is, as I think about this work we're doing on childcare, is that it's really building off work we've been doing in the early childhood development space for years. And in the last 5 years, that work has really paid dividends. You can see in the bottom left corner of this screen the growth in early childhood education investments as a proportion of our education budget. And what you see is that in 2017, we had about $500 million invested in early childhood education, which was 5% of our education budget. But as of 2022, that number is $2 billion and 13% of our education budget. And bank finance responds to demand we get from countries. So this is showing not just a shift in what the bank is investing in, but a real shift in what countries are demanding. And then you can see on the right side that this, excuse me, honey, thanks. You can see that this is mirrored in our early childhood development funding as well, which is more cross-sectoral. So just to wrap up, I think I've covered a lot of what I was going to say about how it's going so far and other reflections, but I think a key point is that we are seeing huge demand across countries, much more than we expected. We are also seeing a lot of fragmentation in countries. So the child care agenda is being worked on from a social development perspective, from an education perspective, from a health perspective, from a range of different sectors and both public and private and civil society organizations. And there is a lot of work needed at the country level to try and take a more coordinated approach to try and advance investments in childcare and build the policy and regulatory space to crowd in investments, to encourage people to enter this sector, and to make sure we're scaling up quality programs. So let me just stop there and say thanks again for the invitation today. It's been great to be with you, and we're so excited about this work, and we're excited to work with all of you and your partners on it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Amanda, and thank you also for sharing all the work that you've been doing and are even planning to do, and for calling out and really underlining the importance of public financing. I think that's a really, that is the one that will move the needle, in addition to employer-led programs. And actually, that's a good segue to the question that I see that Ragi has posted in the chat, saying, he's asking, hi Ragi, by the way, nice to have you connected here. Mandated employer-provided childcare has failed to expand access to childcare. And actually what that does is it creates more barriers for women, women's employment, because now employers hesitate to hire somebody, particularly married women. So he's asking whether there are good models for government to incentivize employers to support childcare without creating these disincentives. I think it's a really good question about trying to do something and then having an unintended consequence somewhere else. So I want to turn it back to the panel, and maybe I'll probably just add another quick question from my side. I think, Karen, you said in the beginning, one of the issues was about redistributing responsibilities within the household. That talks about distribution of work, not in an economy, not in a country, but within a household. And that's a sensitive issue, right? It's so personal as well. And I wonder if there are some, I mean, from the panelists, I wonder if there are insights on that in terms of operationalizing that goal. So I want to turn it back to the panelists, maybe 30, 40 seconds. You can respond to either Ragi's question or mine, or maybe pick up something that another panelist raised. So back to you, but just keep it to 30, 40 seconds, I think. get some quick reactions. But maybe I'll go with you first, Karen.
Sure, thanks, Namita. Redistributing childcare and other care work responsibilities within the household, or to be honest, even outside the household, to civil society, the state, the market, and communities, they are sensitive issues, and it does really rely on addressing social norms in a range of ways. It will depend on context, but we have seen some success with engaging men and boys on these issues in particular. So things like husband schools or fathers clubs, where there's sort of men-to-men conversations around the general household and social benefit of a more equitable distribution of unpaid care work tasks. In some contexts has it takes time, but has borne fruit. We also have to remember that we're not just trying to convince people within households and communities or local leaders, but also business leaders in large corporations, government leaders. So that social norms change has to be at every level. And in order to make that social norms change, we do also need to have some of those policy changes in place. Including around, this mandating around, parental leave, flexible workplaces, childcare within corporations, and, addressing social norms and policy change work hand in hand in order to move us forward.
Lauren?
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, to the first question, I did drop a line in the chat, and I absolutely agree, and I think it's one of the recommendations that IFC has come out with in terms of government policies is to be mindful of unintended consequences and to think about removing, number of women workers or percentage of women workers from those mandates so that it's applicable to all workers and therefore doesn't de-incentivize companies from hiring women. Of course, that's not the intention, but it is an unintended consequence that we have to be aware of. I think on the second question, absolutely agree with Karen on engaging men and boys, and I think the workplace can be a really interesting place to do just that, both in terms of workplace policies, so around paternity leave, for example, but also, just the day-to-day role modeling, especially that can come from the top of an organization. So something as simple as, a male leader saying, I'm not going to have early morning meetings. What that does to the workplace culture and how it affects the whole workforce, men and women, subtly can also be very impactful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Victoria?
I don't want to, kind of say what Lauren and Karen have already said, but I do think what we've seen in South Africa, so and in certain sectors, is having a robust kind of parental policy, maternity policy does help participation of women and does help retaining within the labour market. So I think kind of that aspect, and that's both at kind of at a business level, but also at an industry level as well as a government level. So kind of having those policies align and including both male caregivers as well as female caregivers.
Thank you, Victoria. Amanda, you have the last word.
Thanks. So, everybody's covered everything very well. So I'll just add a slightly different perspective is that, I think when it comes to social norms, one thing we have to remember is there are ways to shift in the short term, but it is also a long-term issue. And while it can feel frustrating, changes that this generation sees as they grow up with mothers who are working, with fathers who are taking on more care responsibilities in the home, we're going to see that in the next generation. And so I think that's it's important to keep that in mind. But also I want to emphasize again the quality agenda of that we need to make sure that the childcare that is provided is decent quality that parents want to use so that we counter any social norms that might exist against having children cared for outside of the home. But we also need to make sure that the childcare is affordable, so you don't have this trade-off for women in particular of, am I going to earn enough to offset the cost of the childcare? And then finally, also that it needs to be convenient, located near homes or near places of work with hours that work for parents and are flexible. So that again, you're making that decision, which for many people isn't a decision, between childcare and work, you're just making those two things be able to work together better for families, recognizing the individual and differentiated needs of different families. But again, thanks. This has been a great panel.
Thanks a lot, Amanda. And thank you all for joining today. A big thank you to the panelists. Give us about half a day and you'll see all of you'll see the recording of the webinar, and you'll also see the slides that the panelists presented. Plus, there's a ton of resources that a lot of people and panelists particularly have posted in the chat. We'll try and make sure we package it all together. It'll be on our website in maybe half a day, but tomorrow morning it should be there. A big thank you to the panelists. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks a lot. Have a good rest of your day.